Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I hear the sound.
Yeah, we'll wait for everyone to kind of
Yeah.
settle down. And I'll just hang out here and I'll adjust the level. If you don't mind, too much, I'm back.
Yeah.
Can we have everyone seated, please? Just grab a seat so like it looks all nice and clean. There are a few seats over there, so like, if you guys want to see the speakers up below, I would suggest like. Perfect. Well, hi everyone. My name is Yasmin. I'm co-founder at Founders Village. First of all, welcome to everyone for coming here on Founders Night. This is the 15th Founders Night. So glad to see you guys here. A big round of applause for our community. Most of you who are attending the event for the first time do not know like how we started the event, and I always love to share the story. We started Founders Night from the space of our house, and we started from backyard. And I remember like one day, me and some of my friends, we were like just so bored. We were like, nothing is happening in San Francisco. Like, we're San Francisco. So we thought of like hosting an event, and I was like, fine, I'll just cook 500 sandwiches and make some burgers, and I'll make a homemade bunch, and we'll call it Founders Night. And we launched the Founders Night, and there were like 200 founders. And then we did another one, and there were like 300, and 400, and then it was just like onwards and upwards. And then we were like, we can't stop doing that. Maybe we can just cater food. I don't have to make sandwiches, but like we'll just keep doing it. So here we are at the 15th Founders Night. So glad to see you guys here. I'd like to invite Angel. First of all, I'd like to thank AWS Law for hosting us here. And I'd like to invite Angel, who is the principal startups at AWS and also leads the Activate and community here. So everyone, a big one for Angel.
Thanks, Yasmin. And thank you all for coming. When Yasmin said that she was planning the next Founders Night, I was really excited because we had just opened up this space that you're in right now. So I said, well, why don't we do it here? Has anyone been in the law space before? Yes? Okay, good. There are some. Yay. Just quickly, so you know, this is a space that's available and free to founders. And some of you haven't had a full tour yet, so if you do want a full tour, we can definitely make that happen. There's podcasting space, there's classrooms to do workshops, brainstorming sessions. There are meeting rooms that are very good for investor meetings. We have the Ask an Expert bar over in the corner that you might have seen. And so we have solutions architects, business intelligence, cost optimization experts, all sorts of experts that are over in that space regularly. And we host lots of different kinds of events. In fact, I'll be moderating a Web3 Ready event coming up soon. So anyone interested in blockchain and Web3, please do register. Yay, we've got that. Let me guess what your startup is. Just for a little context in terms of who I am, As Yasmin mentioned, I'm leading our Activate programs and community. And so Activate right now is primarily our credit program. So you can start getting ready to build with AWS. Hopefully many of you are already. And that's our credit program. So $1,000 worth of credit all the way up to $100,000 worth of credit. And we're expanding that program out so that there's lots of different templates, tools, solutions from ML to you name it, infrastructure builds, app, mobile, web, you name it. And within that program, you get access to lots of different free resources, training, certification, you name it. So if you have any questions on any of that, I am happy to be a go-to person for you. So, yep, quick. Yep. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So so the question is, if you've already got credits, maybe from one of our partners or from your VC or one of your investors, you can access the law space for free. You can access all of the resources that I was just mentioning. So if you have questions about what resources are available, please do feel free to come to me. And if you are working with an investor or a partner of ours that you've got credits through already, they should be able to answer the questions, but if not, you can come back to me. And I have a lot of empathy for everybody in this room because I'm a serial entrepreneur myself. My last exit was in 2018 to Ford in the smart mobility sector. I've also been a co-founder of an online gaming company in London, a social media startup in Argentina that we sold to IAC in 2016, and founder of a AI MarTech business called Sensei. Had a good exit to Candy Capital in London. So I've been kind of across the spectrum. And so when I talk about empathy, I mean true empathy. I respect everybody in this room every day because it can be really, really tough. So, but also very rewarding. So I think tonight we have our lovely guests here. And they are the stars of the show tonight. So in addition to any of the questions that you've got for AWS, you're going to have a Fireside Chat tonight with Guy and Adam. And I think this is where the real brilliance comes through. And I think these kinds of events are incredible because I think we only get better when we learn from other people who have been on this journey. So I'm super excited, and I'm going to let Guy and Adam introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. I can hear you. Welcome, everyone. Super excited. Honestly, I want to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to talk to Guy and learn what worked. He recently sold his company Brightback to ChargeBee. An incredible story. I actually knew him when I was a founder. I was a founder for a total of about 8 years, and I met with him, and we were both building something similar in the startup customer success space. And I remember kind of having the back of my, I was just like, okay, I'm going to be really cautious talking to you, but I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about, and the story ended with, he has the exit, my company shut down, so he kicked my butt. But that's why right now my passion was, as a founder for 8 years, is just learning and helping other founders see what I didn't see. So I do that in 2 ways. I interview founders on Zendesk's podcast, Sit Down Startup. Currently I run VC and startup partnerships at Zendesk for startups, so definitely check us out. But the whole point is to understand the growth stories of what worked in those early days. Don't just tell me to do the generic things. I want to know the tactics, and that's what we're going to be trying to dive into today. So as you do have questions, feel free to just raise your hand. For the most part, we have a pretty good agenda here, just questions we're going to go over. But first, there we go. Let's go. That was it. I'm moving along. So Guy, welcome. If you would first just give us an overview of your background for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And he's very humble. I was actually quite intimidated when I first met you. He wanted to interview me and get some perspective on the company they were looking to start. And I think you had a clipboard or a notebook of 100 customer and potential user interviews. And I was impressed by the rounds you've done in Silicon Valley. So, but anyway, thanks for having me tonight, inviting me. My name is Guy Marion. I was the founder and CEO of Brightback. We automate customer retention for subscription services, and sold the company in January to ChargeBee, which is one of the key billing platforms, subscription billing platforms, and growing fintech service. 1,500 employees serving thousands of merchants all around, mostly America, APAC, and EMEA. And yeah, looking forward to sharing some of the story.
Let's do it.
All right.
So first of all, okay, how old were you when you started Brightback? I know it's a weird question, but I feel like you get numbers all over the board. Just curious.
Yeah, so I was 38, so by startup founder standards, definitely on the mature end of the founding story. I will say my first startup I co-founded was a company called Cohesion, or it started off as CVS Dude, like CVS, the version control system, and Dude, like a surfer dude. We're actually in Australia. I just finished my science PhD in marine geochemistry, and joined my partner who started hosting software source code. I started using it before the end of my PhD to host like MATLAB, data files, images, content, just started collaborating all over the world. And then, we got to know the Atlassian guys who were, at that point, a 50-person company in Sydney, and they sort of said, every morning, wake up and check your 7 KPIs and make sure you're optimizing people coming to your site, converting, and solving a problem that people can't otherwise. 37 signals at that point, the signal to noise laws was a very big influence on us at the time as well. It was all about how can we get this free service and start monetizing it. We eventually funded it, moved back to here to Palo Alto, where I'd done undergrad, raised some funding, and actually were acquired by CollabNet. After first having companies like Zuora, Marketo, Salesforce, we implemented those stacks, and I started realizing that if you could help developers who were signing up for a trial make it seamless to check out your first SVN repository, connect your Bugzilla, and start to use it, and if you identify those friction points along the way and then trigger the right email and in-product notification, you could dramatically improve the adoption. So I jigged all this together using Salesforce, presented it at Dreamforce one year, and it was crazy that the amount of pickup we got for CVS Dude as a result of that was my earliest days of recognizing that sort of targeting, personalization, and really tracking the metrics was how you could really ramp up, early stage companies as you're building the product as well.
So you started this one and you sold that?
Sold that to CollabNet, which at the time was a big Atlassian competitor, the enterprise version. We were the leaders in subversion hosting. They were the enterprise leaders. So we were low millions AR at that point. Bootstrapped entirely, like literally, ramen bootstrapped pretty much, living on a house on the Gold Coast in Australia before moving over here. We were a team of 15 people. It was a 6.7x multiple in the revenue at that time. I became the VP and GM. And then a lot of companies that now are companies like Okta, they were SaaS. It was actually our first professional edition customer. And Marketo, all these customers that have now become big industry leaders were hosting your code with us at the time. So it was a really good way to sort of enter the ecosystem at that point.
How did you, I love that, but then you stayed at companies like Zendesk and Autopilot for a while.
Yeah.
If you're not, how old were you when you sold that company?
I was 30. I got married, sold a company, and then took a honeymoon in like a 3-month period. So it was a pretty crazy after just cranking for years and a PhD into that.
You got to rest.
Yeah.
But tell us about why stay at Zendesk for that long? Why stay at Autopilot? Like as a founder.
Yeah. So when I left CollabNet and joined Zendesk, the COO at the time, Zach, who became my first advisor at Brightback, who was on the board, he said, "Come over. You're going to miss the boat if you don't come now. It's this company's the highest growth SaaS startup." I was a big believer in coming at CRM from the customer support angle versus coming at it from the sales angle. We had an ethos at CVS Dude. Everybody did support, irrespective of the role. And you get to know your customers really well and help them grow. And Zendesk was all about this. So the idea is we want to take some of the ideas you've developed, like automating everything and personalizing, targeting, and do it at scale. So I joined there as employee 297. It was about 35 million in revenue. It was still at a time when it was this out of control startup. Everything was working, but kind of not super organized, I suppose. And started going through and sort of optimizing different parts. Like how do we go from a self-service experience to a one-to-many group experience by identifying where in the customer journey based on usage patterns the user was, and then triangulating the enterprise experience with email and group efforts and so on. So we did that, retention, expansion, and along the way noticed that, so the other thing is at CVS Dude, I built the first version of Brightback. So we actually took the Facebook deactivation page, and the top reason for churn at the time with our online service was my project had ended. So we launched this product so we built a cancellation experience. The user would select why they're canceling, and you present an alternative that wasn't annoying, because our customers would jump ship if you tried to annoy them, but it would be like, I'm getting too many emails, here's how to reduce that, or I don't have access to issue tracking, well, here's a product you could use. We learned that project ending is the #1 reason for churn. So we built this archive plan, launched that, and we always joke that was our first hit product in a while. It exploded. And so at Zendesk, I also would beg, borrow, and steal with the head of product and others to try and do things like present an in-product offer to self-extend your trial. Or if you were at sort of 8 and above reports built, and your limit was 10 on a performance plan, you could upgrade to the enterprise if you triggered a notification saying upgrade and boost for a period. But to do these things, it took 6 months, right? Minimum, just to even make the case. And yet we get these, you get like a 9% accept rate of a trial extended by 1 month, and you get 2-3 months, and that would go to 18%, and that had or 17%, and that had a huge impact on our growth. So anyway.
You're seeing these things that are working at a big company, and then you make the decision to go off. And I want to just help me with your decision to be an EIR at Matrix before starting Brightback.
Yeah, so.
Just to explain that maybe to anyone who isn't aware.
Yeah, so left Zendesk to join Autopilot was, again, let's disrupt this gap between MailChimp and Marketo. We're making automation really easy to do with a visual UI builder, a free trial, and you can start for $5 a month. Also Segment at this point had come along, and sort of Salesforce is limiting by the object model, and Segment was event driven. So the idea was, let's make it very easy for companies to be able to do some of this personalization stuff, like plug in Segment, track the right event, and then engage in a multi-channel SMS, email, and so on. I noticed that marketers were effective at using it, but the growth teams would go crazy with it, and the retention tools weren't really well served by, really what Autopilot was built for, which was email marketing, lead nurturing, lead routing, and so on, even though you could build these spectacular sort of onboarding trial journeys. So we grew that, I joined the 3 founders from Zendesk when they were relaunching API first. We grew 0 to $1 million in 9 months, not 1 to $4 million in the next 12 months. So it really grew fast. And in year 3, they moved back to Australia. We sort of needed to get more cost efficient because they pivoted. So I stayed here, and then I've been in touch with one of the board members of Zendesk, Dan Stalder, who had, someone pinged me at Autopilot out of the blue, and he would recommend people to hire or whatever. And I spoke to him and others, and he said, have you considered, one of the board members at Autopilot said, join me as an EIR. And so then I explored speaking to a few, and Dana was someone I had a lot of respect for. Matrix was, they had David Scott and the whole data-driven Pacific Crest survey, so they do the analysis of the entire SaaS industry. And I was looking at either pricing optimization, retention optimization, or better data management for Salesforce, basically, how to export your data and go out, control over your data.
So you're doing a research initiative basically under Matrix.
Yeah.
Are you doing customer interviews for Brightback at the same time?
Yeah, exactly. So
and that's when we met.
That's where we met, yeah. So I read the book Inspired, and he said, rather than writing long product specs, if you're not an engineer, and I'm not an engineer, I'm sort of, I'm a web developer early on. I started building a lot of our website stuff, but never serious engineering. But I had a very clear, vision based on what had worked on how to build out the beginnings of the product. So I actually wireframed the entire product. Did 250 wireframes, click-throughs. It would continually show these to some pivotal conversations, like the head of growth from Dropbox, who said that who just joined from Atlassian, and he said, we may optimize cancellations and retention ourselves with X thousands of accounts per month, but we'll never learn from across a whole industry and platform learnings. And Segment, their head of growth at the time, shared some really interesting insights, and Instacart, and back at Zendesk. So I started showing these wireframes, and literally you just evolve it until it became pretty clear. People stopped saying, have you thought about this? And started saying, I want to buy that. So our first customers were Copper, SparkPost, PersistIQ, and a couple other startups. And basically, at that point, realized that with hi-fi mocks and extensive, like 40, 50 customer deep sessions, we iterated hugely, actually. Figured out the right reports, the right mechanism, the self-service experience before we wrote any code, and actually raised a $2 million seed round off of that was the product. And it was amazing how people look at your click-throughs, you can make a video out of it and say, this is a great product. And I'm like, well, not a product yet, but
Yeah.
it's going to become one.
Tell me about those interviews.
Yeah.
So you're basically just showing, are you bringing an iPad or is it a Zoom call? And what are you showing the customer, the prospect?
It was usually an iPad, yeah. So you have the experience there. I did it all in Balsamic and then later on in Figma. But yeah, you would go through and I'd have, as you work through the different parts of the app, it would evolve it over time and would do things like user test, whether it's more important for you to see revenue retention by cohort on a dollar basis or a cohort view or a graph view. It'll take 3 months to build that and the data model behind it when you're developing. So I could test that with 10 experienced users who potentially be a buyer, and sure enough,
Without building it.
Without building it.
How are you tracking this? Like, are you putting it in an Excel document? Are you an Airtable? Like, are you systematic or is it more just kind of feeling it out?
No, both. I had a Google Doc where I tracked every interview, feedback notes. Also started kind of I'd add them all to an autopilot journey on my $20 plan and start.
Did he give you a free plan?
Yeah, maybe I did. I don't know. They were definitely supportive of the designers who came over here. And I started emailing all the people and just started a regular feedback session and sort of brought them into this early journey. And people knew that, I was trying to crack this thing that people hadn't, which is if customers go to cancel a subscription service, then presenting an offer like a Google AdWords platform at that point is very effective. So I said 15% of churn is what you can reduce through the right optimization and offer testing. And it turns out we're averaging 23% right now across the platform with repurchase rates that vary significantly but by business model. But at the time it's 15%, that would be material. You'd add our snippet, you pass us your data, and then we would enable you with by redirecting to our platform and then testing everything there. Anybody could go from waiting 6 months to modify 1 pixel on a cancellation experience to having complete control there. And sure enough, the day we launched the MVP with Copper, and you see the data flowing for the first time, and no product like this had ever existed before. It was a very amazing feeling to realize that we also had integration with Slack, Segment, Salesforce, and a couple others. We realized that the team was all interacting. We created a new workflow in Slack for their teams.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And help me with how many interviews you did before you were like, okay, we're there. Because I remember doing our first interviews. There's a difference between someone saying yeah, that's interesting. Reach out to me in a couple months, or like, hey, that's very interesting. And then you go a week, you send them a follow-up email, and they never respond to you. And that's the confirmation this isn't it. As opposed to hey, how much is it going to cost? Though when I got those kind of responses, I was like, there's something here. But I'm curious what indicators you were looking for, or was it just a gut feel?
No, it was, first of all, how likely would you be willing to buy this? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd end every question like that. And if they said, and people would start to pretty quickly list 7, 8. When you realize the founders, everybody's on your side, which is great, and that's what's fantastic about the area we live in, is it's very supportive of being a founder. That is very different from somebody actually saying to you, I'm going to pay for your service and use your product, because they'll all say to you, that's a great idea, right? So, and I kind of was aware of that at this point, and yet when you're doing it, it's dangerous and you can get seduced. So I started to ask people as well, how much would you pay for it every time, right? And it started off $50 a month or $100 a month. And as I was saying to you before, the original plan was to launch this, buy some AdWords, start driving to our site, start get trials, start iterating feature feedback, and evolve. What we learned was that there was no search volume at all whatsoever for customer retention software or churn management or anything of that sort. And so it was all word of mouth early on. And also what I was doing was trying to figure out pricing, because we have this usage-based pricing model. That was the early days. And so I would take the number of cancellations that a company had, estimate 15%, look at the average customer value they have there, and then determine how much retained revenue you'd be able to potentially retain for the customer. And I knew from Zendesk that these numbers were huge, but early on we wanted to anchor the value of Brightback in the value we're delivering, not at the cost that we're delivering. So I used this and then with Copper, they signed a $2,000 a month contract with our MVP. And that was when I said, okay, well, that means that we're not going to get in the category of Slack or what Autopilot was. But also at that point, I realized the market wasn't infinitely large. It wasn't like Zendesk with 27 million SMBs globally. It was, we had to find high volume subscription services. And
how did you feel at that moment? Was that like the should I keep going kind of moment?
Validating, and it also led to a preemptive Series A offer, so that was helpful as well. That was when I realized that this is, that's a decision you have to make. You want to go down the path of venture funding, which is a whole different ballgame than when you've got very low expectations, and supporters, which is investors, which is angel investors, which is what I had. Most of the operators had that at that point.
Let's go right into that. Tell us about your funding strategy, like day one. Did you need funding? You probably didn't need it right away, but how long did you go before you raised your first round, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so we raised $2 million in May. I had an engineer friend of mine from my network who was unconvinced he was going to be a founder and in for a 5 to 10 year ride, which is what it is. But he was he was a top seasoned engineer. And so I connected with him, and then I had a designer who I brought on as well, who was a co-founder of another company called Preact, and then was a lead designer at Heat. So the three of us sort of came together, and the seed round, I raised $2 million on the basis that, a dollar acquired is, a dollar retained is 7x cheaper than a dollar acquired. We were going to be able to use clean data from billing and product usage, and so Segment was their input. And we were going to use this to join, build a profile of the user, and then serve up the right retention experience and the right offer for SaaS businesses, focusing on startups initially, who there's 0% chance you're going to develop that, but you would want to both retain subscribers and learn why people are canceling. And so, everybody piled in on that. 0.9 Capital actually led the Zendesk round, led the seed round, which really helped in the end. And mostly it really was just $25,000 to $10,000 checks. And so that was fantastic. So we launched with that, got the first handful of customers on, and including who I mentioned. And then Index Ventures came with a Series A preemptive offer. And at that moment, you have to say, well, if you go down that path, you're going to have to hire, you're going to have to demonstrate rapid growth. How confident are you? And I said, yep, I'm confident. There was a very clear need in the market. It's a gap between CRM, email.
What month are we in right now? Sorry, you said May is when you raised your seed.
May was seed.
So the preemptive Series A was when?
It was August.
Wow.
It came through in August, so it was very quick. It was 2018 at this point. So
wow.
I come out of the AR, and the question was, would serious companies that have security risks and so on trust a third-party service? And the answer was, we learned initially yes. So the first year was just one thing after the other. It went really well, and it was not like my first experience of founding where you were just scrapping the whole time. And then ironically, our customers started questioning what they were paying and what they were using, and a lot of what we were initially building for them, we didn't have an ability to tie it back to revenue. We had very limited ability to actually personalize the experience. We created a best practices template, but the way we built it, you would segment, if a customer went to Canada, you could split a trial from a paying customer or inactive for active. And then we would do this all with the customer in Slack channels, and we'd do it for them, and it was too slow. We didn't have a self-service experience. So we started building that out. We hadn't yet cracked how do you really reduce churn, even though we knew that a standard offer generally worked. But with big SaaS businesses, they can build that pretty quickly. And so, yes, at that point, we started seeing our first cohort making noise that they didn't actually want to keep going with us. And that was when the things got interesting.
I bet it did. Well, I'm watching our time here.
Yeah.
Help us with one of your most impactful superpowers as a founder, and something that maybe you could share with anyone here.
I do think, kind of what I've shared a little bit is if you care about, I cared about this whole area of growth, personalization, optimization. It passed down a long road of experiences that have been successful at small, like 0 to 1 million, as well as larger companies. So my superpower was definitely articulating a clear vision for what the industry needed, and then getting people to come around that vision and join on to And then secondly was when working with customers, listening very carefully, not only to what they're asking you for, but what their top problems are. So the idea is, what is it that you're trying to accomplish on this page? What is it that, are you using this to, like, what metric are you looking for? Is your board or your CEO asking about versus what do you think is important? And then we would listen to the customer and then build that into the product. And I think those are the two things, the customer feedback loop and bringing some great people together around this vision.
That's really cool. And I love what you're saying, like knowing how to laser in on what they're actually saying.
Yeah.
Because customers say prospects say one thing, but they mean something different. And I'm curious, how many people are 0 to 1 in here? Okay. Any 1 to 10s? Ian, I should have done it. That's awesome. It's interesting to just get where everyone is, because I think 0 to 1 is just exponentially harder. That's why I'm trying to double tap on where you are, because I think it's easy for you to be like, oh, and then we just made it to $1 million in ARR, and then we got to the next thing. But so many people are sitting in here like, what? Tell me more about that, because how do you get that? So I think the superpower plays into that. Is there any growth strategies around that after you started to get your initial, say, $500,000 ARR that you can share?
Yeah, I think one thing is, so a couple of lessons learned, right? One is absolutely you're either pre or post product market fit, right? And you hear about, there's lots of different ways to describe it. Some people say you know when you find it. Other people will say it happens at $1 million. Other people will say, but generally what happened, we saw it at CVS Dude, we saw it at Autopilot, where CVS Dude, we figured out the gaming industry needed source code control. And we just exploded once we kind of optimized the tools they needed and a couple features. At Autopilot, it was selective sales force sync. Once we hit that, like sales cycles and online conversion rates increased. At Brightback, it was pivoting to focus on the direct-to-consumer space. So we had MeUndies and Freshly, the food delivery service, and those started from a lesser company, Crazy Egg, which is a analytics platform, a really smart GM who started using this product to help customers who were canceling because they never onboarded. He would jump in there and help them solve their problem by actually taking a screenshot. I'd add the snippet for them to their website, take a screenshot of data, send an email to them in this template, and they massively started reducing a significant portion of that churn. So we realized that at those volumes, that's where it kicked in. And
what was it like talking to a customer pre-product market data, pre-post? Like, I mean, like going through your head, because I think I felt it as a founder, but it just seems so different to me, and I'm curious any more about like one of those conversations. Maybe you talked to your wife and you were like, hey, this amazing thing just happened today.
Yep.
This conversation, could you pull us into that?
Yeah, so early on, customers would say things like, we don't want to present a discount to users who already accepted a discount. They would want to say, we want to present a pause option to a trial and a extend to a paying customer. They would say, we want to separate out by languages or regions. And each time this would happen, we would have to spin and start to really develop. We realized what we need to do is pull the logic for how to send a user to an experience like that outside of the page and then build a routing mechanism. So we did that, which freed up the ability for customers to build audiences with all the data that we passed them. So you could, just like a segment in many marketing platforms, you define an audience and then people started concatenating all these different strings and then creating different experiences and then routing to a page they control. And we started doing that. We said, well, how about you just use the data you're passing us to define your own audiences? And that was when they said, yes. And then I remember we launched MeUndies in the beginning of 2020, which at the time had, tens of thousands of cancels per month. And the head of CX jumped on a post-launch review. We used to always do these post-launch reviews and said, Brightback's had an immediate impact on our bottom line. We haven't had a net negative customer day since we launched, and this is an immediate change. We want more. Like, we want to send all of our traffic through. And after that, like every customer we brought on with these high volumes would respond. They had more ideas. We built the experience managers so our customers control that. They built the audience managers. They could target it. And we stopped having the lift, and we started more. So that in 2021, we tripled customer. We reached $1 million in revenue in the first 2 years after kind of really chunking our way up there. And then the second million we got to in like 7 months, and it kept growing faster from there.
That is a battle though. That 2
So
years.
we tripled in 2021. And that had not happened any of the last 2 years. Yeah.
But it took 2 years to get to 1 million.
Yeah.
And you're a founder who's had an exit before. And you've worked for the best companies in the valley.
Yeah.
And you were an EIR at Matrix, which everyone's heard of.
Yeah, at the end of the day, startup, it doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, are you getting traction, are you building a product people love, are they referring it to their friends, right? So it doesn't matter like how far along you are. It's a very, it's either solving a problem or it's not.
Yeah, and no one cares about your background. They just care about the product.
I mean, it gives you, it helps, and, I had to pay my dues to get to the point where I got that starting point here, but, which we did in my first companies. We were nobody, we just kind of started building things, but once you get going, it doesn't matter. Like, people are either using the service or not.
And it's really easy to see that. I love even at first when you're saying they're not like crazy excited about you until after they see the impact.
Yeah.
I know that sounds obvious, but I think there are some products where they see it and they're like, this is it. But in your case, it's very much just like, hey, it's a utility. Is it making an impact? Is it not? Well, the data will speak for itself.
Yeah. Well, we had to figure out the workflow, really. We had the concept of a deflection funnel, and if customer deflects, you put them on a watch list, which is a countdown, and they don't cancel in that period, there's a save. So once we define this workflow from working with customers, and now we have repurchases, so if you deflect a cancel, we look at all the downstream purchases. Once we built that sort of virtuous cycle, and then we put that right on the dashboard, then we stopped getting asked questions like after we launched, is this working? Right, and they started to look at that and maybe a bit of anger on a deflection rate, and we became sort of really focused on deflection rate optimization with our customers. So how to optimize that process, and it went from being like we're trying to put the pieces together to a formalized methodology that any company can implement. We benchmarked this across our platform. That was a growth hack in a huge way. It was from day one I knew that like there's no best practices or benchmarks. You can't look up and say what percentage of cancellations can you retain. So we benchmarked offer types, cancel reasons, and then by 3 business models: e-commerce, digital consumer, and SaaS. And then with every customer, we would aggregate and anonymize and then roll up these benchmarks. And it turns out that when even when you're talking to the largest education subscription businesses in the world, and they have really great growth teams, which we kind of grew up to pretty quickly, frankly. For them, it's a 6 to 12 month project with a team of engineers, like multi-million-dollar project to get to some of these results. And so when you have benchmark data that you can share, it's not just then that we also use this for marketing. Like we take the benchmarks, we do the retention cheat sheet for e-commerce, so the retention cheat sheet for food, and then we would provide that, and then find all the food companies in the space, upload those domains into LinkedIn, and then drive ads to a Freshly case study, which they very generously did with us, and suddenly, we won more than 10% of that whole vertical within a pretty quick period of time. So we went from being very inbound, initially aligned, to very targeted, data-driven outbound, and that's how we started really accelerating growth.
Taking that success story, amplifying it to the right people, and
Yeah.
providing them with data in the sales process.
Yeah.
So you're adding value instantly.
Yeah.
By just the interaction, and that's building trust.
Right.
It all seems so clear in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, it was the data that really mattered. Like people say, yeah, we've already got a cancel flow. What percent are not canceling today? And say, well, I don't know. And say we were averaging 22%, and so a couple others like that. And this is, we hired a team, a couple of SDRs, external month to month, that sort of training them up, and they would start to book these demos, and we do the demos with net new companies, and it started to become very repeatable very quickly.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and then we'd always still be iterating. We're still to this day iterating pretty heavily because there was no one we weren't becoming better, faster, cheaper. We were actually building this for the first time. So it was, so it doesn't stop yet. You're still
on the journey.
Yeah.
Even though you've sold. That's what questions do we have? I know we're right here at the time. Boom, let's go.
What's been the most effective method for you to get those people to give you feedback? Or how did you approach the first 50 companies that kind of did the case studies for you?
How did you approach the first 50 companies and getting them to respond to your, hey, I want to get feedback from you about what I'm building? Yeah. And what's your name?
Igor.
Igor. Thank you, Igor, for coming.
Thanks, Igor. Yeah, so I think a couple things. One, so I haven't mentioned as much. I had a team of, given the first million, I would recommend keeping the team pretty small. And when you work very closely with the customer, I think staying personally very involved. I would work with each customer. We'd work with our product lead, who was actually my first customer as well. We'd share a Slack channel with our customers. We look at data with them, share the feedback with them, and do regular live interactions. And then, of course, also our support channel became a key feature request zone for us. But we would ask questions like, which reports, what are the impacts you've seen in the bottom line? Like, what's the direct effect from reducing churn have you seen that's made it into a board deck or into a product planning deck? And if so, could you send us that picture? We freshly did a 6-month POC where I personally worked with a product retention lead there. And she wrote up like basically a lab experiment with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And it was so detailed that we then took that and did a public webinar with a subscription industry show and walked through this case study that they were willing to share with all the numbers. We showed $1 million of retained revenue, but the method we went for testing categories and then strengths and offers, and then we built a lot of content around that as well.
That's really cool. Hey, maybe another part of the question before we get to Jeff is help us with like before you had a product.
Yeah.
We're back in the balsamic days.
Yeah.
How did you get them to respond to you? And before you, as you're answering, the thing that I did, and take what I say with a grain of salt, because this man has the exit. But for me, it was all about the subject line. We were targeting the same persona, and I would always target the subject line around the pain, not around the solution. So and we A/B tested that in every way we possibly could. And I cared more when someone responded who didn't know me, because I was running a podcast at the time in that space, and like unfortunately, if that started to grow and people were responding to me just because they wanted to talk to me, not because of the pain. And you can get really confused when you're talking to someone about a pain who really doesn't have the pain, but they're just there because they want to talk to you. That's just my 2 cents. But I want to know what the master says.
The pain is key, right? Because if people don't care about your future. They care about, like in our case, what would reducing churn by 15% do to your growth this year, right? And that instantly gets people's attention. So yes, email outreach with a common subject line. That's actually, we'd always anchor around what would happen if you reduce churn by 15%. And most people care about that dramatically, it turns out. Also, a couple other things that I did that were really effective. I raised about 30 investors came to my seed round. And so every single quarter and early on, like month even, I would send a quick update. Here's our progress, a screenshot, some custom proof points. And I always say my asks, and I give kudos to investors who helped. And they were really a big help with getting introductions early on, particularly sort of some of the companies that became right feedback points, because they always respond to investors. So that was really helpful. And then finally, I guess a lot of people had the people I've worked with or known over time. So I was able to either get to them, and they would always refer 2 or 3 people. Who else can I demo this to? Who else cares about churn? So, yeah.
Awesome. And real quick, Yasmin,
So, as an early stage founder, what was your routine? And then another part of the question is that usually like founders around me, I keep hearing like people are like, oh, I'm going to LA Tech Week, oh, I'm going to Austin Week and stuff. And like how important it is to actually go to those events as opposed to like sitting in front of your computer and building a product, right? So what was your routine when you were in early stage founder?
Yeah, I mean, we were, the 2 guys I was working with, 2 co-founders, were both remote. So we had no office. I was at EIR and sort of moved out. We were definitely, I did try and go to a couple of events. I go to growth meetups actually like this. This is great because everyone's here to help each other out. But generally speaking, it was entirely about starting to build a product. It was those meetups were not, other than getting some inspiration, it was entirely about getting work done. So routine was pretty much wake up and so I would do, actually that's not true. So I did BD time, and I put BD time in my calendar as a fixed block from like 8 to 9 every day. And it would just be time where I'd outreach on LinkedIn or people I knew and just follow up. I also had that nurture journey that I was running in autopilot where I crowdsourced like naming the company Brightback, right? Be Brightback. I had a whole ton of other names. And as I did that, I sort of brought this group, that grew to a few hundred people. And then I host, a drinks night one night, and people come and care a lot about this and follow it. So trying to do things that were mostly online and scalable. And I've actually moved out of the city at that point, so it forced me, it was actually harder to be in person anyway, so, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So what I've seen is customer experience centric tools are more vertically focused within the industry. How do you figure out your right niche with chargebacks or churn? Like how do you figure out this is the right vertical I want to put down on amongst others?
How did you figure out the right vertical? I'm just repeating it just since we didn't get the audio recorded. So how did you pick the right vertical within that? Yeah.
It's a great question, and it's really important, at least it was for us. So I started off with SaaS, and then learned that, in SaaS, in CRM and marketing automation or marketing or prosumer software, people cancel because they never onboarded or pricing concerns. But most of SaaS, when someone goes to cancel, they've largely made a decision. They're going to switch from Twilio to SendGrid or something else. So one thing we learned is I was actually at a Point 9 Capital event, and it was all about the extreme focus on what are you 10x better at. You have to be 10x better than what you could ever build or what anyone else is doing. And so at the time, we had these 3 value props, like with retention, we've just recently renamed Brightback to Drive Retention, so I'm trying to get the wording straight. With Brightback, you can automate workflow because we have an event-based data model that can trigger workflow. So we had customers like Keep Truckin' that were creating amazing workflows in Salesforce triggered from Brightback. We had insights where we have some great reports that will show how churn and exactly who people are churning, their sentiment, and so on. And there was deflection. So we're actually generating deflection. What we learned, and we looked at all of our win-loss analysis for 200 conversations over a 24-month period, was that the one thing people pay for no matter what they say was deflection itself. So we said, okay, we're gonna go all in on deflection, and then deflection is proportional to the volume. So the food space was when we, perhaps it was serendipitous, but MeUndies was retail, Freshly was food, both were high volume, both were growing like crazy. And so in each of them, once you anchor on a really great example like that and you build around that, we grew quickly. So suddenly we started growing both those verticals, and we targeted exclusively in there because they want to use the same nomenclature and what are the tactics, what are the offers. And then we got Yoga International, which was a health and wellness. So we went into health and wellness. And then the pandemic kicked in, and SMB SaaS started churning like crazy. So we made our service free for SaaS companies, and that was helpful to get a lot more engagement. And really, actually, the world was exploding, so we're trying to help out these companies. And at the same time, the food, like Freshly stopped taking signups because they exploded like 3x in a month at that point. So we got really lifted by this sudden rapid rise. So our platform went from, hundreds of thousands of cancels per month to way bigger than that in a very short period of time. And then you're right, we took a vertical approach. So even to this day, it's about 7 or 8 key verticals that we focus on, that the use cases are very broadly classified into e-commerce, digital consumer, and then prosumer SaaS, so the 3 broad models. And we benchmark our data around there, we structure the business around that, and at ChargeBee, it aligns nicely with the vertical focus that ChargeBee has as we think about global subscription businesses.
So it's kind of just testing. I mean, you tried different areas, it didn't work. Some areas did, and then you just doubled down.
We doubled down and 10x down once we found one that worked. And I would like to say, obviously we did analyze the main industries, but the reality is once we found something that worked, we just kept building around that,
Yeah.
Versus trying to be too smart about it.
That's awesome. What about you, Rafael?
I wanted to ask about your personal opinion on the current market situation when it comes to investment, especially for companies that are in pre-seed and seed stages. Because when you listen to big venture capitals right now, they're trying to lower down the valuations of new companies.
Yep.
Is this something to care about, or let's say you can wait and raising half a year? And you can still survive as a company. Would you wait or accept what you do? And what would your approach be on raising today if you were a startup?
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to over fixate on the valuation. And I think the thing to think about valuations is that you have to think about next round, not this round. So if you raise, we actually raised a pretty healthy round on our seed, and then it tripled by the A 3 months later. That actually created a dynamic where I had to make sure I tripled again, 18 months later on the $8 million of funding I had. So, and actually the ratio was about right for us, but we were lucky we really took off that third year. I would say in general, I would not try and drive valuations too high. I would focus on, if you raise, say, $5 million or $2 million seed, investors want to see a 2x to 3x increase in your valuation by the time you next raise. So if you're raising $2 million, you need to get either your ARR or your market cap, your multiple up, so that by the time you raise in $2 million, you're going to run through probably 12 months, right? So you got to double or triple then, and then at that point, you're going to need to double, triple again. So to answer your question, right now the industry is going down. I understand there's a race to quality. So actually, the best startups that are crushing it, right, are still getting pretty high multiples, is my understanding. The best companies are still raising huge rounds at high valuations. It's just everybody besides that top, and then the VCs are all going for those. So everything below there, I think the valuations have definitely tapered. But generally speaking, I would, a down round, which I'm fortunate I haven't gone through a down round, but it does create dynamics where you're going to have to issue new stock so that your team doesn't get diluted, and your investors will. So it's going to hurt from a founder perspective, but assuming it's not extreme, the most important thing, honestly, is just to continue demonstrating traction and growth with customer revenue and usage, right? And as long as you're doing that, then if you have a good offer at hand, even if it's a flat round, I would probably take it and keep going and focus on your core, because fundraising is a huge waste of time. You can learn a lot and you take a lot of notes and you get great feedback, but it's confusing, and you're going to get, every day to day, you're going to have these extremely experienced VCs who give you a very different thesis on what you should be doing. As a founder, you're just sifting through that. At the same time, you just have this coming to Jesus moment with your entire team, where you're like, these are the things that matter most. We have to focus on deflection. We're all in on that. And then someone says, well, it would be fantastic if you automate the entire workflow of this company, and we'll fund you for that, potentially.
That's awesome. What about you down there?
Hey, Guy.
Can you say your name?
My name is Peter.
Yes.
Peter Wong. And then I have a question on the, so how much were you paying yourself? So we got to cash flow positive really quickly, and then we were scaling really quickly. And we're trying to pay ourselves 20 grand before we can raise the round. That's on track. So we're trying to understand that's like something that, I'm trying to understand how much we're doing this.
Yeah.
Maybe we do ranges if you don't want to do the exact number.
Yeah. So one thing that I did do is, because I raised an early venture round, I was paying mostly market rate or a little bit below market rate for venture-backed companies for most of the people we hired. So we had pretty senior engineers early on, and that does set up a dynamic where you have great people on board, and we could build and do develop a sophisticated product pretty quickly. But it did mean that we were pretty high burn, and so we had to catch up. Our ARR per employee had to sort of quickly rise, and again, we did that in year 3, and we really sort of caught back to where we needed to be at that point. But it made for a pretty nerve-wracking period of time. As a founder, I definitely was, I paid myself a salary, and my 2 co-founders, but it was well below, like way below market. Not quite 20 grand, but it was low.
That's all we got for today, guys. Thank you so much. Make sure to check out Guy on LinkedIn. Adam McDonald, Investment Startups. Thank you, guys. Thank you again for that. Guys.
All right, one more round of applause for Adam and Guy, please. Thank you for coming. I have one more plug before I let everyone go, but I'm going to give it to the admin right before that as well. Just want to let everyone know that AWS Startups is currently accepting applications for the Female Founders Accelerator. It's an 8-week accelerator program. I believe it starts in October. It's going to end in December. If you have any additional questions, feel free to swing by the front desk. We can let you know how you can inquire for more information. But I'll pass it off to Yasmin now.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Adam and Guy, for an amazing fireside. I feel like every single person was just spellbound here. We've never seen our audience this quiet. So yeah, a big one for our audience. And of course, Guy and Adam, amazing story, by the way. And I was just so inspired. It's funny, every single time, whenever I listen to a success story, they're just all about bootstrapping and like customer experience and like actually doubling down on the effort that they spend on like making their users happy, as opposed to like, oh, we raised a $200 million, like that was our valuation and stuff. They actually get down to work. So yeah, amazing work there. I'd like to invite every single person here for a group photo on the stage. We're just gonna move this, and let's just get together for a group photo. Are you guys ready?
You want everyone on the stage?
Around the stage and on the stage.
Got it.
Yeah. For you guys in the middle. I know. Yeah, we've done this before. So yeah, some people will sit here, some people will stand here. Yeah. Everyone gather around us. We've done this before, right? Okay, tall people go in the back.
You can't leave.
Yes, I'm fine.
Do we have everyone here? Okay, some people will have to sit down.
YouTube channel.
And probably have to do that. You're tall as you from the back. Yeah, you can come back. Yeah, these tall from the back. Okay. We definitely have space for a few more. Okay.
Test, test.
All right. Do we have almost everyone? All right. From the camera. Smile. You guys ever do something like
Silly photo, 1, 2, 3. Nice.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, everyone. We'll be here until like 9 o'clock, so you can feel free to network, use the space. Thank you, everyone.
Probably look like it's done right now. I think let's go to YouTube. Go to YouTube. Yeah. It should be